So I think it's important to center this conversation 7 months ago, because budgets are not developed overnight or in isolation. When you met in June, you established at that point that it was a real priority of the board to make sure that you are allocating your resources in an equitable way. And in this process, we've taken a number of steps to help to do that. Mainly we've brought transparency to the process. We've labeled things in different ways so that it becomes more apparent where money is going and what it is that students are getting in various different spots relative to that. And we've looked at a number of other pieces that we'll talk about here as we go in order to help you achieve that goal. You set us a feasibility target of 2%. We've met that, kind of, in the sense that we've met it around the top line, and Matt will take us through some of the ins and outs of that as we looked at how to operationally do that. He'll talk about the fact that we are not applying the FY24 fund balance into this budget, so that we will be making a different recommendation to you around, and so there's some complications in terms of meeting your target, but we've delivered something for you that I think meets your expectations. And this is the first full budget where we've taken into account your strategic plan and looking at how are we going to allocate funds that relate specifically to that. So one of the first steps that we took, you might remember, is any financial manager in the district office took equity-based financial management training and really learned the ins and outs of that. That's the same training that some of the folks that have led the way in Vermont have undertaken in this area, and we've used it on a daily basis as they've come back. We've used a zero-based budget strategy, which means we've taken all the furniture out of the house, put it on the lawn, and then put things back piece by piece based on kind of where we are now. And the district has changed substantially over the years. You've gone through a pandemic, you've gone through unification, you've moved to a different curriculum model for coordination. So there are a lot of things that have happened since the last time this probably happened. This is a practice that's recommended every 4 to 5 years, just to sort of make sure that things don't grow or inequities that are in the budget don't get bigger over time. And we've also restructured funding blocks. So the way that Matt had begun some restructuring for last year's budget, as I understand it, is by saying here's some operational pieces and then here are some pieces that are around student need. So we've actually taken that one step further to pull together the 7 funding blocks that we've talked about over time. That is a model that we intend to continue with so that we can keep tracking year over year. There are some really important drivers behind this budget. We have, to Andrea's point, applied a uniform implementation of class size policy D6 as it's currently written. And we've looked at comparable staff to student ratios in all buildings, which is your policy D4. It's around comparability. To ensure that we have comparable staffing ratios, across learning environments. Equitable resource allocation, C29 is your equity policy, and that helped us take a look at places where some places students had band and chorus options, other places not so much, right? Sometimes some places people had access to far more guidance time without sort of a data piece behind that than others, and so we've smoothed those things out in the budget in the best way that we can to ensure that everybody's got equitable access. There's a difference, as Andrea pointed out, between equity and equality, and we see that in actually the third attention point there. We looked very thoroughly with the board in the executive session and across, our administrative team at state and in many cases local performance data where it was available to determine are there gaps in how students are successful in math, in literacy, or in any other place where we currently measure that success. And we have allocated resources in the name of equity support specifically in those schools. You'll see that there are different levels of support in different schools depending upon the performance needs that we've seen. And that's a place where we have departed substantially from a model that might be normally thought of as equality, meaning everybody gets band and everybody gets chorus. You know, here students need very different things, and so they have had an opportunity to have that. You might remember that just prior to your June retreat, we surveyed staff in terms of where we needed to be headed related to the strategic plan and discussed that at that meeting. In the fall, in October, we had community conversations and surveys regarding what was important to the public as we prioritized what we knew would be a tough budgeting season. I mean, it's just, we've discussed at length the difficult fiscal circumstance that we're in. You know, I don't think anybody can sustain property tax increases the way that they had played themselves out throughout the state, and we understand that we need to provide some relief in those areas. And so really getting feedback ahead of time as to what was important helped that process. And then, you know, as we keep going, we'll have community input sessions. You know, I'll talk with the staff tomorrow afternoon. The community will have an opportunity to provide input into what they see here or other things that might be on their mind on the 9th of January, and you know, we'll kind of continue in that process until we're back here on the 13th. So, in starting where we're prioritizing, I want to just remind everyone of the targets that are in the strategic plan, because they were instrumental pieces of influence for us as we were moving ahead. We've made these slide friendly, so they're not exactly word for word, but close in that sense. So in belonging, all students, staff, and families say they are safe, welcome, and included at school with demonstrated improvement over time. So we have indicators to develop. We have ways of assessing that, and then strategies that we're putting in place directly that are helping us at scale, you know, as we move forward with that. Some of the other pieces relative to family engagement we've talked about and have strategies ongoing for. Reduction in incidents of identity-based harm is also something that is an ongoing target for us. We've made some improvements in those areas this year. We have many proactive steps that we can be taking, you know, and are on our plate as we continue. Strategic planning targets for access. Here, one of the things that we want to make sure that students are able to do is have essentially equitable access to opportunity. And our attempt to smooth out some of the differences between the schools in terms of staff and student ratios, as well as some of the opportunities like chorus and band and others is directly addressing that. It's also important that we're able to take data to the third point as we move forward around, is there a difference in opportunity access relative to historically marginalized students? That's work on our plate. That's not work that we started just exactly now in a formal way. That's work on our plate and on our minds as we're building the priorities for this particular budget. Success targets played a prominent role in our thinking as we built this budget, in part relative to some of Sarah's comments. It feels like maybe it's the first time in a while that we have been able to start to focus on academic rigor in a meaningful way across the district, you know, because of the social and emotional turmoil that our students and our staff and our families have endured over the last number of years. That's taken its toll. And this year, you know, has felt like, okay, we're making some progress. And so in planning for next year, the success targets have been front of mind. The Picus report suggests that it's important to set lofty goals, and you've done that relative to math and literacy proficiency increases, and so the plan that we built for you responds to that. It says, all right, if in 5 years, that's where you want us to be, we have to start now, and these are some strategies that we're building that are related to that. The data that we need related to achievement gaps, we don't have right now, other than state assessment data and some screening data. And so that's local assessment data that we will need to create measures for and begin to log, in order to be able to make achievement there, which is partly what we have in the spending plan that we're giving to you. Graduation rates increasing to 90%. I don't think there's any circumstance in which I don't think about that as 100%. I'm guessing the high school staff would be in agreement about that. That's how we operationally think about that. Every student needs to have an opportunity to graduate, and sometimes there are barriers that get in the way. And so a part of the spending plan that you're going to see establishes a significant effort to really move that needle in an important way. Okay, so if we keep going here, there are ways in which the strategic plan shows up in the budget. Under belonging, you'll see that there's an additional position that's created. So we will not be refilling the Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Student Services. Instead, we'll be creating 2 positions, one of which is on this slide, this Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Restorative Practice, which is bringing greater diversity and restorative practices that are inclusive to our community, helping us take the good work that we've done in reducing identity-based harm in a direction that's developing our community in a stronger way. So that it's not enough to know what they shouldn't do, it's really let's develop the proactive ends of how we become a community of the whole. Student response coordinators are new in this budget. Mike Dudek has done a wonderful job piloting some of the responsibilities that someone in this role can take on, thinking about a behavioral system that gives us the data to determine if we have data that says that students, our way of responding to students or their way of responding to us, it differs based on their groupings, right? And based on a number of other indicators that relate to things that we, if we know them, we can do something about them, as a whole. So much of the work that will go into the job description for those positions, which are scheduled to be at all 3 Middlebury schools, providing leadership also to the smaller school administration, comes from Mike's good work, and I want to make sure to acknowledge that. We're also going to work hard with that team to create and maintain district-wide student conduct databases. We have new educational quality standards coming out, that we will need to implement in this next school year that really embed diverse, inclusive curricular materials into our classrooms at all levels. And so this position would work with our Director of Teaching and Learning to help make that transition in our staff, which in some cases can be a hefty change. In Access, you will see as we go equity supports that relate to student performance data. That's block 7, and Matt will have an allocation for you of what that looks like. We have a new budget block created to ensure that the equitable opportunities are visible across the district. That's block 6. It's called Student Opportunities. It's a block that the Finance Committee, when they first looked at it, said, "What? Can we put more money in here? Why do we only have this much money in here?" And I think it's going to be one that in future years we'll have good conversation about what are the opportunities that are above and beyond what the law requires that we would want to make kids eligible for in this district. One of the opportunities that we are shifting in terms of access for this in this budget is access to the Camp Keewaydin experience, which is a 5th grade kind of coming of age experience that not all schools, all fifth graders in each school had equal access to. Some had to fundraise, some could go based on endowments or whatnot, and this year, everybody gets to go. And in the budget moving forward, everybody will get to go. And I think that's the kind of thing that I think will be a nice conversation piece for us to have as we go. We also have increases in health FTE. Those positions right now reside at MUMS and the high school, although part of the high school's proposal in that is that part of that FTE can help think about how can we move forward as a district, a K-12, pre-K-12 district, to make sure that we're coming into line with the new wellness policy that you passed and the comprehensive health standards that are behind that. So we don't have increased FTE at the K-5 level in health in this area. That would be an FY27 add if the team, as they're moving forward, feels like that's the right approach to that. So we'll kind of take it one step at a time. Those also represent proactive mental health strategies, right? Health is a proactive strategy for mental health, and I think those are as important as the reactive supports that we put in place on the student services side. Success. So we have investment in classroom embedded math and literacy instructional specialists. That's a new term, I think, to this district. It's a highly leveraged practice, and these are folks that we likely already have in-house that we will free up to be able to work side by side with teachers as perhaps lead math teachers or lead literacy teachers in helping our universal instruction as a whole just continue to level up in order to be able to ensure that kids are able to perform at higher levels across our system. So one thing that I imagine would be on the teacher's mind relative to that is, are these people that are telling us what to do, they're observing what we're doing and they're telling us what to do, what does that look like? And the answer to that is no. These are people who are who might be accessing training and bringing it back, but they are in there teaching with existing teachers and working with students with the idea of helping us to create a better system of classroom lesson development and execution in math and or literacy where it's needed. And the building principals have sort of thought about that related to how their buildings may work as they put together their triangle plans. So those are sprinkled throughout the schools where the student performance needs relate to them. And then we have additional FTE to develop common local assessments and data teams in support of student success. So this will feel like a controversial add because it expands the curriculum coordinator team a little bit with the purpose of making sure we can develop interim measures of student success. Because right now we have our screeners and we have the state assessments, and we really don't have a lot in between that's designed to actually make that crosswalk, and there's a saying in student performance work called, if you just set the target and you keep it steady, then people can hit it, right? So these interim assessment measures help us understand where we are related to those targets, and they're very effective in literacy and math. As a matter of fact, I knew a day when Addison Central led the state in this area. I'm not sure exactly where those assessments went, what filing cabinet they might be in, but there was a time when that was absolutely 100% true. It was under Jim Lombardo's leadership when he was superintendent, and I respected that work very much. So those FTEs are related specifically to our ability to develop those, implement those, and utilize those to have a better sense of how kids are proceeding as they go. The positions that we're going to create in the success targets, I hope work themselves out of a job. It's probably 3 years before we're seeing substantial difference in statewide assessments from the results that we're seeing. But they're meant, it's a fairly substantial shot in the arm that relates in part to our footprint, but in part to the fact that we're coming out of a time where much of the work that used to be in place had to sunset, and so we're kind of starting that engine again in an important way. And So that's why you'll see as many positions in this area as you see. Okay, so thinking about brass tacks as Cornwall likes to call it, in this budget you will see 21.2 FTEs of new or reimagined positions, which is about a $2.2 million allocation. I've spoken about the Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Restorative Practice. I've talked about the Student Response Coordinators. We will be shifting from a 2 special ed director model to have a single director of specialized services. We, I think over the next 18 months, have some deep review to do in the way that we're delivering our specialized services in order to be able to think about, are we as effective as we want to be, are our impacts where they need to be, and are we as efficient as we can be, as we move ahead. So having a single director that's responsible for that changes the model so that the principals take on more of an LEA responsibility. They will probably take on more of a responsibility, they will take on the responsibility, which I think we've talked about, relative to supervising special educators and things of that nature. So that's a model that Addison Central has known, and so we'll be returning a bit to some of the pieces of that operational model that will allow us to streamline some so that we can move ahead after we have a review, which we have some resources in here for some consultant services that will help us with that. It's not my area of expertise, and there are people out there who know a lot about that and can lead our team through an exploration of that. We're not looking for people to come in and tell us all the answers of that, but to facilitate a good conversation about where we are and where we might think about going. So the 1.5 curriculum coordinator ad I've spoken about, that's related to local assessment, freed up. And in doing that, there's also a restructuring of those existing positions such that we're able to focus them more. There'll be somebody that's just stationed at Mary Hogan. There'll be somebody that's stationed at MUMS. So that way teachers have more equitable access to the really wonderful curricular components we have. We have a curriculum that is reserved for children of wealth in other places. And we present that curriculum to everybody, where kids are able to follow their own inquiry, their own interests. They're able to study in transdisciplinary ways. Our math curriculum is a concept-based curriculum. It teaches kids to develop algorithms, not just follow algorithms. There are things that we do here that are maybe no longer the focus of teacher prep programs. So when we have people who are joining us, and we've had a pretty substantial, as I understand it, turnover in staff, we have to build those skills. And that would be true, though that's excellent curricular pedagogy. Whatever framework we're using it in, whether it's an IB sponsored framework or any other sponsored framework, we are proud of that, and that's something that we're working hard to make sure our teachers across the district have better access to training to do in that sense. The health educators I spoke about, one of the things we want to make sure of is that our librarians in each of our schools are able to provide assistance to our classroom teachers and to our students that relate to classroom research projects that come from inquiry work, and come from research that they're doing. And in order to do that, each of our bigger schools need a library assistant in order to be able to cover that space, since students independently are able to utilize that and allow the librarian to be more mobile. And so that's an ad that MUMS doesn't have that, and so that's an ad to make sure that they have that resource so kids have equitable access to those librarians who can provide that research expertise. And then we have 10 instructional specialists. 6.5 of those are spread throughout elementary schools. There are 6 fewer classroom teachers that are in this budget related to an enrollment change on some level, and also, for example, Mary Hogan has fewer kindergarten kids coming in next year, and adherence to the D6 class size policy in the smaller schools. So we're losing 6 teachers on that end, and we're putting 6.5 instructional specialists in those buildings on the ground in order in part to make sure we're helping with those operational pieces, right? Because you have to have a certain number of adults in a school in order to make sure recess is covered, right? So that's important. But most importantly, to be able to bring that specialist training inside in a job-embedded way into our classrooms. You know, we don't have a lot of substitutes, so we can't free people up to go to different training ends of it. We've got to bring it in. And so this is a way to do that, directly impact kids, and leverage a high-impact school improvement strategy. 3.5 of those will be at MUMS. So, you know, that will help tremendously as you know, MUMS is trying to ensure that their instruction in math and literacy is both developed and aligned. You know, in part because of the staff turnover that they've had, but also in part because of the curricular specializations that happen at that level, which is just above the elementary level and not quite, you know, more at the high school level. So at the high school, we don't have instructional specialists this year. In fact, they will be losing 2 interventionists, one in the math area that's unfilled and one in the literacy area, which sort of backs away from that. It advances their graduation initiative with 2.2 FTEs in a flexible pathways team. And it gives us an opportunity to take a look at the existing high school resources and ways that the academic needs there and instructional specialties can be augmented internally, and then if there's something else that's needed, that will be part of an FY27 budget proposal in that respect. So we are losing 9.4 positions overall. Those are the ones that we've reimagined from the list of 30.6 that we've reduced. Some of these reductions we've talked about already. 0.4 art is related to fewer classrooms. The 8.5 general ed paras there are 4.5 at Mary Hogan and 4 at MUMS. Those are vacancies that have not been able to be filled for some time. So those are not, they're not currently filled, so it would be removing those positions from our books. The 6 classroom teachers are enrollment based. We just talked about that. The admin on assignment position that we carry, that's currently Mike Dudak's role. He's placed at Mary Hogan somewhat temporarily, right? And that's been a kind of an uneven piece, so we would be sunsetting that role. 0.6 world language and 0.6 individuals and societies is the high school's work in terms of attending to the class size policies as well where possible. Sometimes at the high school you will have specialty courses that it doesn't make sense to adhere to that policy, but where it does, you know, they've also come into alignment with that. There's one administrative assistant position at MUHS that's sunsetting, and then the post-secondary coordinator position. Part of the flexible pathways work, will likely involve credit. That credit is better delivered with a licensed position, and so the flexible pathways coordinator will be a licensed teacher, as opposed to an unlicensed position, where it is right now. And that job description will be expanding to think about pathways to graduation that also help extend to post-secondary work, which is beyond the scope of the position that's there right now. Those, Matt will refresh, you'll see those come around again when Matt talks about Block 3. In Block 5, you'll see the sunset of the Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Student Services. The building principals are doing more of the personnel pieces that are appropriate to be done at the building principal level. That's something that we've worked on together, and so they're beginning to absorb maybe some of that work that an assistant superintendent would do, and I'm doing so as well. The equity parts of that position are in the Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Restorative Practice, and the Student Services work is otherwise held with the Director of Specialized Services. So those are the exchanges. The two Directors of Special Education we've talked about. The ACP Middle Administrator, in our ACP programs and our alternative programs, one of the things that Matt will talk about when he gets to Block 5 is that, many of these programs were envisioned as part of the consortium, right, which was 3 districts together. And in the 2003-2004 year, that consortium fell apart, so that in this year, we hold all of those expenses, and then that's not what we can afford, and it's also not necessarily what we're able to sustain in the way that they haven't grown with tuition students in the way that we might have expected in some ways. So we're going to do some reimagining with our alternative programming that holds those programs in closer proximity to the high school and to the middle school. 208, it will be different. That's a program that is developed for students with low incidence disabilities, and that program is one that we will probably continue to grow and accept tuition students from other districts into. So that's a little bit different type of programming. So we will keep all providers that are in the ACP middle program, but we will not be keeping the administrative position, that's there, and that's Kathy Farnham's position that we spoke about earlier. The Aspire coordinator was an ESSER position, that's at the high school. I think the idea is as we do some melding together, we'll be able to make some efficiencies there. Pre-K outreach special educator is a position that is just based on anticipated student need, and we can go perhaps from 2 to 1, so that's why that reduction is there. The 2 behavior specialists and consultants, so we have 10 FTEs that you'll see later in Matt's presentation that support the behavior of our students. Of those 10, 4 provide consultation roles, similar to what Xanthi described. Those positions came into play before COVID. They were expanded a bit, in COVID, and so we're dialing those back to 2 rather than 4. That's not going to not require us to rethink some things, and none of this is. Every single position on this list makes a difference in our community right now, and so all of them will require us rethinking how we're going to work that, and that's a point I want to make sure isn't lost as we move ahead. 4 interventionists are on that list. Those are ESSER-related positions also. 2 of them at MUHS I just spoke about, 1 math, 1 literacy, and then 2 of them are at the K through 5 level. We have 14 academic interventionists that we carry on our books right now. We're proposing to continue to carry 10. And we will be splitting those, you'll see in Matt's presentation, between those that are helping with IEP services and those who are helping students who need a second time around or some skill building to complement what's happening in universal instruction. And then the speech and language pathologist, right now what that represents is we are not using as much of the contracted service. If you remember, we were looking for 5. We couldn't find 5, and so we contracted with a virtual service to provide that. It looks as though we'll be able to actually have 4 moving forward in that way. And those really are positions because that's a side letter with the association. Since we have those are union positions, we can't fill them, and so this is an exception to that. So we'll start with them as positions next year as well, and that's why it's listed there, specifically as a position. So our net loss is 9.4 FTEs, and Matt you will see those again as you go through those different blocks as a whole. This is my last slide, and I want to make sure you have time for questions of me that are, at this 20,000-foot level before Matt cues up his stack. Essentially, this is a budget that prioritizes an inclusive student experience and student success. And it begins deliberate investment in those areas in different ways than we are doing them now and maybe have ever done them, here in recent memory. And part of that is catch up, truly. I think the way we've done that, especially related to student success, has been an extensive review of data. The principals and program directors have all put together the triangles that we've talked about for a couple months around how could we best make a difference in the data that we need to move and the impacts we want to see for students. And you'll see that that the equity supports in Block 7, they reflect those requests. It invests essentially in our first instruction. We have reinvested some of the cost savings that some of the policy implementation has freed up in order to optimize our first and best instruction. And I think that's something that will take some getting used to as we make a shift from maybe investing different resources in recovery and than we are in our universal instruction and hopefully we're able to move forward in the right direction. But it's a shift and I don't want to minimize that point in that sense. The way that we're talking about the budget all season really is meant to provide financial transparency and sustainability. Every single expense that we have, every dollar that we spend shows up in the next 23 slides, is it? 38. Every single dollar. In other years maybe, grant dollars, things like that may not have been part of a budget presentation because they're not thought of as local dollars and so on and so forth. In our approach this year, we have provided every single dollar that we're spending and exactly where we're spending it so that you can see that in a transparent way. And we hope that we've built something that's financially sustainable. Taxes are lowered depending on what happens in the legislature in every ACSD town, as a result of this spending plan and the information we have right now. If nothing changes through the legislative session, every taxpayer in every ACSD town should see a reduction in their property taxes as it relates to school. And we are also about $1,500-ish below the threshold, which means that's not a challenge we should have hanging over our heads in the same way as we're moving forward. Our regular growth, depending on health insurance explosions and all those other things, without the unforeseen, we should be able to accommodate and be within the state's reasonable expectations. Our class sizes average, as Matt has shown before, right around 15 in the K-5 level, both at Mary Hogan and in the rural schools. There are challenges with that, as Andrea rightly explains, in that sense. Hopefully this is an architecture that will help us to move forward without undue interference, from outside external forces. So I appreciate the work that's gone into this presentation. The work has largely not been mine. Matt's done a tremendous amount of work. He has rebuilt every spreadsheet that's ever been built, I think here, and recategorized things. Re-looked at everything. The principals have done a wonderful job going through their data in ways that are maybe new of late, and really working with their teams around where are we going and what could we do and if we could envision something different. And the district team has been instrumental in thinking about how do we take this strategic plan and bring it to life through our allocation and our project management work, right? As we're really bringing things forward so that we can take it off of the plan stage and into the action stage. And so from that standpoint, there's loss in here, and that's real. But there are also really good things that are happening here for kids, and we are contending, I think, successfully with a very complex financial situation that I think we're facing well.